A canvas bag on a bicycle handlebar. Before the sun. You remember it if you carried one. Heavy on the left because that was the side you reached with. The strap worn pale where it rubbed the chrome, the whole thing smelling of newsprint and cold air. It rode with you in the dark before the houses woke. Somebody in your family had a bag like that once, or a wagon, or a ladder, or a pole. Somebody in your family did a job that does not exist anymore. These were not hobbies. They were the ordinary work of ordinary men and boys in every town in America. Then the work went, not fired, just no longer needed, one trade at a time, until whole kinds of men simply stopped being made. Here are 12 of the jobs your grandfather knew by heart. Count them down and see how many of these men you can still picture. Start with the bag, because the bag is where it started for 1,000,000 children. In the early 1980s, close to 1 million kids ran paper routes, and about 95 of every 100 were boys. The papers landed at your house around 3:30 in the afternoon, and every one of them had to be on a porch by 5. You folded them, banded them, and rode. It was an afternoon job because the afternoon paper was the paper. In 1963, there were 1,400 afternoon dailies in the country and fewer than 400 morning ones. The morning routes belonged to grown men. The afternoon belonged to the schoolboy, who got out at 3 for around $30 a week in the 50s and 60s. Once a month, you knocked on every door with a route book and collected the money in person, which is how a boy learned who paid on time and who did not. Then the reason for the afternoon paper quietly went away. In 1963, the networks doubled the nightly news to half an hour, and within 20 years, the evening paper had lost its purpose. By 1990, the number of child carriers had fallen 60%, and by 2004, 8 in 10 routes were run by adults in cars. The Internet finished the rest. The bag on the handlebar was one of the first of these jobs to go, and almost nobody noticed it leave. Listen for it instead. A soft mechanical clatter behind and above you in the dark, through a little window you were never meant to look at. That was the man in the booth. In the 1940s, there were more than 30,000 projectionists in America. By 2015, there were fewer than 5,000. His was dangerous work the audience never saw. The old film was made of nitrate, which was close to a solid form of nitroglycerin, and it ran across 2 carbon rods, burning hot enough to throw the picture the length of the room. A nitrate fire made its own oxygen and could not be put out, so the booth was built like a vault. Every window wore a fireproof shutter held shut by a wax seal, made to slam closed on its own if the heat melted the wax, sealing the fire inside. The rods burned down and had to be changed roughly every 40 to 50 minutes, so he was never truly still. With 2 projectors, he watched the top corner for a small mark, the cigarette burn, and threw the switch to the second machine in the space of a breath. What ended him was the xenon lamp, first used in American theaters in 1963, and everywhere by the 1970s, which needed no tending mid-reel. Then, digital cinema arrived in the mid-2000s and took the film away entirely, and one technician began minding a dozen screens that mind themselves. Now, the counter, marble under your elbows, a row of swivel stools, a long mirror behind the fountain, and a young man in a paper cap showing off. Soda jerking was a job for loud boys, expected to entertain you while they worked, not just to serve you. At the peak, In the drugstore fountain era, there were hundreds of thousands of them across the country. The name came from the motion. You jerk the handle back to send the carbonated water into the glass, and the man who did it all day became the jerk. It was popular work, but poor pay, somewhere between $1,200 and $2,400 a year, depending on the town, or about 38 cents an hour for a boy starting out in the early 50s. Every shop had its own language for the orders. In the Bronx, stretch one and paint it red meant a Coca-Cola with cherry, and the slang changed from one city to the next. A real chocolate malted was a small performance, an exact count of scoops, and a measured pull of syrup, and the tall machine roaring for half a minute while the boy talked to you. What took the counter away was not one thing. The fast food chains spread in the 50s and 60s and pulled the teenagers out the door. Bottled soda came home in the refrigerator, and the chain drugstores decided the fountain was worth more as retail shelving. By the 1970s, most of the counters were gone. This one came to you. A knock on the door, and a man on the step with a leather-bound sample volume and a smile aimed at your children. The pitch was built out of small agreements before you ever heard a price. You want your children to get a fine education, don't you? Encyclopedia Britannica had turned this into a machine. Elkin Harrison Powell started its door-to-door selling in 1932 on the monthly installment plan, and at its height, Britannica kept around 2,300 door-to-door sellers. A full set ran $800 to $1,000 in the money of the day, and the salesman kept 30 to 50% of that. The installment plan was the whole trick. $800 sounded impossible. $15 a month sounded like nothing, especially when the man had just finished describing your son at college. Then the argument fell apart. In 1993, Microsoft put a whole encyclopedia on a $99 disc called Encarta, and a $900 shelf of books stopped making sense. Wikipedia arrived free in 2001. Britannica let its entire United States and Canadian sales force go in 1996. After 60 years of that model, and stopped printing the bound volumes in the spring of 2012. The man on the doorstep had nothing left to carry. Back to the sound, and then the silence. Your television went dark, or the picture rolled, and your father said the words every father said, which were, "Call the man." The man arrived in a station wagon with a trunk full of glass tubes sorted by number, like a druggist's drawers. There was a whole trade of these men, because by 1963, more than 90% of American homes had a set, and every one of those early sets was fragile. A television from the 50s could hold as many as 30 vacuum tubes, and tubes burned out. He pulled the set from the wall, took off the back, and clipped his tester to each tube until he found the dead one. 9 times out of 10, it was a single burned tube, swapped in 20 minutes while you watched over his shoulder and your children asked him questions he did not mind. It cost a few dollars. Then the tube went away. Solid-state transistor sets came in around the early 70s and simply did not break the way the old ones had. And the imported sets got so cheap by the late 70s that fixing one cost more than buying a new one, so people stopped fixing. The man who sat in your living room with his tester on his knee had no reason to come. You never got out of the car. A rubber hose lay across the driveway and rang a bell inside the station when your tires crossed it, and a man in a bow tie and a company cap trotted out before you had shifted into park. He filled the tank, washed the windshield, checked your oil, and checked your tires. Every visit unasked. Checking the oil was theater. He wiped the dipstick, held it up for your inspection, waited for your nod, and capped it. Full service was simply how gasoline was sold from the 1920s onward. The pay was decent. Around $1.25 an hour in the 60s, one attendant recalled, plus a commission of about 8 cents on every dollar of gas, which added up fast. Two things ended him. Self-service was still barely legal at the start of the 70s. In 1969, only one station in 100 let you pump your own, and it was banned outright in many states. Then, the oil embargo of 1973 squeezed every operator's margins, and cutting the man at the pump was the fastest way to survive. Between 1972 and 1980, the number of garage and station workers fell by a third. In most of the country, full service became a thing you paid extra for. Some of these jobs were done by boys, young enough that the uniform swallowed them. The telegram messenger was 10 to 18, in a cap and a tunic, and he was paid by the delivery rather than by the hour, which drew boys who wanted no boss over them. He earned around 2 cents a call, something like $2 a week, while the grown operators inside earned 10 to 15. He rode a bicycle, or in the densest blocks ran on foot. The telegram was at its most popular in the 1920s and 30s, when a wire cost less than a long-distance telephone call. The blank was a half-sheet of yellow paper with the message printed in capital letters and the cost counted by the word, and the boy on the bicycle carried it up your path. During the Second World War, that same walk up the path became a thing families dreaded. The War Department sent its notices through Western Union, so a uniformed messenger at the gate could mean the worst kind of news, and most such wires began. The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret. What ended the telegram was everything faster and cheaper that came after. The long-distance call got affordable, the fax came in the 80s, email came in the 90s, and on the 27th of January 2006, after 155 years, Western Union sent its last telegram and stopped. Now the pole, 8 to 12 feet of wood or iron with a small brass cup and a hook at the top, carried over a shoulder at dusk. With it, the lamplighter opened the valve and touched the flame, one lamp after another, and walked a route of 70 or 80 lamps in an evening. This was older work than most on this list. Baltimore lit the first gas street lamps in America by the middle of the 1850s. By 1879, that one city had nearly 5,000 gas lamps and 1,000 more that burned gasoline, tended by about 100 lamplighters. The pay was around $2 a day. The morning was the harder shift. After he went back out at dawn to put the lamps out, he cleaned the soot off each glass globe, trimmed the wick to an exact length, and checked the valve for leaks. Electricity ended him almost the moment it arrived. Thomas Edison lit Lower Manhattan from his Pearl Street station in 1882, and over the next 2 decades the light spread block by block through the cities until the man with the pole had no lamp left to light. He wore white gloves, and he called the floors. In a department store, you knew his voice before his face, announcing ladies' wear and the restaurant as the brass gates slid open. It looked easy, and it was not. He stood at a brass lever and had to feather the car to a stop flush with the floor, a knack that took weeks to learn. At the peak, there were more than 90,000 elevator operators in America. Their ending has an exact scene. In September of 1945, 15,000 elevator operators, doormen, and porters walked out on the office buildings of New York City. For a week, the tallest office towers in the world sat mostly empty. The levers were right there, and people had watched the operators work them for years. But running an elevator yourself felt dangerous, almost forbidden, so office workers climbed the stairs instead. When a few finally pulled the lever and the car obeyed smoothly, the case for the operator came apart, and the building owners had their proof. The machines were already waiting. In 1950, only about 1 in 8 new elevator installations was automatic. By 1959, it was more than 9 in 10. Nobody fired the operators all at once. New buildings simply stopped, including the little station where he stood, and the men aged out of a job the new towers no longer had. Down in the pit behind the pins, in a space about 18 inches deep, crouched a boy waiting for the crash. When the ball came through, he jumped down, cleared the fallen pins, stood the rest back up, dropped the ball into the return, and got clear before the next ball, all in seconds. Most of the boys who did it were teenagers pulled from the poorer parts of town. It paid by the line, around 13 cents, to set a line in a good house, as little as 4 cents in a bad one, and the work ran late, past midnight, on league nights. It was hazardous. Flying pins and stray balls came into the pit with no warning and no equipment to stop them, and a slow boy went home with cracked ribs. One former pin boy remembered taking a pin square in the ribs one night, saying nothing to his mother, missing no shift, and earning $8.90. He was 14. The machine that replaced him has a birthday. Gottfried Schmidt built a mechanical pinsetter and sold the patent to AMF in 1941, and the first fully automated 12-lane alley opened in Mount Clemens, Michigan, in 1951. By the middle of the 1960s, the machines had taken the commercial lanes across the country, and the boy climbed out of the pit for the last time. He came before you woke, and he was one of the strongest men you knew. The Iceman's day started around 4 in the morning and ran to 8 or 9 at night, 7 days a week, and it never let up in summer, which was when you needed him most. He worked with an ice pick, an ice saw, and a pair of heavy iron tongs with a leather pad on his shoulder to bear the block, and he carried 100-pound blocks up tenement stairs as routine. You told him what you wanted with a card in the window. A square of cardboard turned so the number faced the street, told him whether you needed 25 pounds that day or 50 or 100. He came in the back door, lifted the lid of your ice box, and slid the block into a wooden cabinet lined with zinc, with a drip pan underneath that somebody had to empty before it ran over. On hot days, the children of the street trailed his wagon and begged for chips off the edge of a block, and often enough he shaved a few off with his pick. The refrigerator ended him, and it took a couple of decades to finish the job. General Electric put its monitor top on the market in 1927, and as electricity reached farm households in the 30s, the last country routes dried up too. By the 1950s, the refrigerator was standard, the ice box was firewood, and the strongest man on the block had nowhere to carry his ice. And now The last one, the one that came closest, because he came all the way to your door in the dark while you slept. In the early 1960s, 3 in every 10 quarts of milk drunk in America still came from a home delivery. Picture the route. It is 4 in the morning. The truck idles at the curb, and the milkman walks a wire carrier of glass bottles up to a back porch, and the bottles clink together, and that clink is the alarm clock of a neighborhood that never fully hears it. In earlier years there was no truck, only a horse and a cart. On a route it knew by heart, the horse walked itself along and stopped on its own at each house, while the milkman ran ahead, so the man never had to lead it. There's a true story out of Lima, Ohio, in the spring of 1912, of a milkman who went into a store to make a delivery and came out to find horse, wagon, and milk gone. The horse had carried on the route alone, and turned up that evening, walking leisurely back across the square with an empty wagon, and apparently every delivery made. On the porch you had left the empties out the night before, with a note tucked into the neck of a bottle if you wanted something extra, a second quart of cream, or a dozen eggs. The milk was not yet the milk we know. Before homogenization became standard in the 50s, the cream rose to the top, and you could see it collar the neck of the glass. And in winter, if the family slept too long, the milk froze on the stoop, and the frozen cream pushed the little cardboard cap an inch clear of the bottle, a small tower of it, standing in the cold. By mid-morning, the round was done, and the man was home, and none of the people he served had seen him at all. What ended him was the ordinary comfort of your own kitchen. The refrigerator got into nearly every home through the 50s and 60s, and once a family could keep a week of milk cold, there was no reason for a man to come every day. The supermarket sold it cheaper than his route could, and the car in the driveway made the weekly trip easy. By the middle of the 1970s, home delivery had fallen to about 7% of the milk sold, and by 2005 it was 0.4%. The clink on the porch stopped, and most who slept through it never learned the morning it happened for the last time. 12 men, and every one of them had a name and a face and a route. The paperboy you paid at the door, the repairman your father called, the attendant who knew your car, the Iceman who knew your kitchen, the milkman you never once saw. They were somebody, arriving at a time you could count on, doing a thing with his hands the town could not do without. And then the town could. We did not decide to end any of this. We just bought a refrigerator or a television that did not break, and pumped our own gas, and one by one the men stopped coming, and we were slow to notice the quiet where they used to be. So tell me, which of these men did you know by name? The one who left the milk, the one who fixed the set, the boy on the bicycle in the dark? Tell me below, and tell me his name, if you remember it. I read every one, and if this brought back a morning you had forgotten, send it to somebody who was awake for it too.